Welcome to the Hoosier Football Tailgate right here on thehoosier.com. Thank you for joining me. I know it's a busy Thursday evening. We got the NFL draft coming up here shortly, and it's going to be a fun-filled night with that, as it always is interesting to see how things play out for those first-round picks as we go along. And then hopefully we'll get to see some Indiana Hoosiers cross that board at one point in time. You got Walker as a possibility. I know he's been a pretty hot commodity with teams in the last couple days or weeks. And then you also have Curtis Rourke, who unfortunately was unable to really participate in all the festivities as it pertains to being able to throw with that, rehabbing the knee. And so we'll have to kind of wait and see what happens. Good luck to those kids as they hope to continue on playing, and I'm sure they will, especially Curtis Rourke, being that he's a Canadian. He has probably plenty of options back in Canada as well, but we'll have to wait and see what all happens. But thanks for joining us here tonight. A lot of things have been going on, as you can tell by some of the recruiting aspects. This last few weeks has been on fire when you think about not only the football program, but the basketball program has been adding bodies right and left. It's almost like Coach DeVries is building a football team himself in that respect. So a lot of things there on thehoosier.com to keep you all up to date with all of that, and making sure that you are well abreast of everything that's happening in Hoosier athletics and all the latest recruiting news. As I came on tonight, I do believe they picked up a freshman, to be a freshman, class of 2026 kid that I think is going to be a pretty good ball player. I've kind of looked at his film a little bit. I'll have a breakdown up on thehoosier.com tomorrow about what he brings to the table for the Hoosiers, because I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic with these some of these kids that are coming on board, because you get a couple big time recruits in. Henry Olinger, the young man from Grandview over in Ohio, he's a 4-star recruit, and that's one of the things we've talked about Indiana, is being able to get up into those higher rankings if possible. And again, not to put too much emphasis on that. The biggest thing is that when you get those kids that are perceived to be higher, doesn't mean they are better than any 3-star kid that would come in. It's it's splitting hairs in some ways. So it's a good situation for the Hoosiers, and things are going well as they head into the off season here tonight as well. But the biggest transfer news for this past week, they picked up 2 portal transfers. Daly from Kent State, and I do believe he's going to be a pretty big ball player. Haven't been able to find much film on him. Sometimes I'm lucky, sometimes I'm not, so I'm keep on looking. But I do have a video up on thehoosier.com of my breakdown of the Kellen Wyatt kid out of Maryland, and I do believe he's going to be a pretty good ball player. And just checking here in there. Hello there, Rudy, as well. Hey, can the Bond kid fill this open slot? That's to be determined. I do think he's got capabilities to maybe be in that situation where he could go inside and be a factor. The biggest thing is that being a true freshman, the biggest thing that helped him was being here early, and he got all those reps in camp. So by the time fall runs around, he'll be better prepared to be in that competition. And it's one of those things that we're going to have opportunities for some of these position groups that may be a little thin in the backup arena, where some of these freshman kids can come in and potentially be those type of kids that Coach Signetti talks about, those foundation kids that he's been trying to incorporate in the program and in these recruiting classes, because while the portal is an easy jump in, jump out type of thing, it's hard to always have to go in there and try to find 20, 22 guys that you think you need, because you're just not there with your recruiting. So as time goes on, the portal hopefully won't be as dependent upon for Coach Signetti and staff and these younger kids coming up through the program. So that's going to be very important in that regard. Let's see here. Is built around the fundamentally sound kids that want to be coached and not coach the coach. Yeah. And I think, Coach Signetti, I think one of the practices where they weren't living to the standards, he talked about dying to be coached and them wanting to coach you. And that's not how it goes in that regard. So it was one of those things with that and everything. Let's see, Rudy, let's see the Maryland linebacker. Yeah. The kid, that's the Kellen Wyatt. I may be able to pick up some film on that and show you guys what I thought of him here in a second. Jason asked, missed the post-game spring show. What'd you take? We're going to get to some of that here in a second there, Jason, as we get into it here. But I do think I want to try to show some of this tape on the kid from Maryland, if you haven't had a chance to see the true breakdown that I did. I'm not going to get into it too much, but he's a kid that in their scheme at Maryland, he's kind of an outside linebacker hybrid. And in IU's defense, that's where they're moving Kamara. And I think they're going to take this kid and move him where Kamara was last year, but he's number 45 right down here at the bottom. And what I liked about this kid is that I do think he plays a physical game. This is a great example of playing his role and understanding who's got the quarterback. And he's not chasing the running back until he's alerted that ball's given. And when it does get given, then he folds back over and gets in on the play. And so I do think this kid is going to be something that can add depth, be a part of the rotation for Indiana up front. It gives them some more individuals that I think they'll have a solid 8-man rotation. Similar to what they had this year, which is vitally important in all that. But this kid, Kellen, is, I think, a really good player. I mean, against Indiana last year, I do think he had 5 total tackles and a sack, if I'm not mistaken. Here he's coming from the top, at the top where he's widened out. And this is one I liked on him when he comes off the edge here. He does a great job of getting into the tackle, and then you're going to see him dip and rip. And it's a good technique that he runs here right there. And you can see the tackle's already holding him, and now he's going to get the sack. That's just great effort. And he plays with enthusiasm and exciting. And I know a lot of things were said about him as it pertained to as a leader. So he's a very good looking kid. In that regard, here's the end zone view of it. As you can see, he gets, the sack from that side of the coin as well. We'll go one more clip here and see where we're at, and then maybe switch over to the kid from Grandview, the linebacker, the true freshman. And here he's down and with his hand in the ground like he would be where I think Indiana's going to play him next year. And I think that in that regard, he's going to add that off the edge, battle the tackle type of deal. Again, does a good job here. He's not initially in the play, but what he does that I like here, he throws this tackle off and then he comes up and makes the play. to me, that's a great example of a kid playing with great effort, playing his assignment, not getting too carried away with just running to the ball for the sake of running for the ball. So he's going to be a good player for any of that they got out of the portal. So I like him. I think he's got a lot of, the talent needed to play in the Big Ten. He's proven that. Remember, Coach Cignetti's main emphasis when he goes in the portal, he's looking for productivity over promise. And there's a kid that was very productive in the Big Ten. And I believe he's just got 1 year left in that of eligibility. So they'll get what they need out of him as well today. Let me see here, catching up with a couple things. Question-wise, is he like TJ Watt? Yeah, he's a little bit like that. Maybe we can get TJ Watt, right? That'd be nice, wouldn't it? I had not seen that, John, so I'll have to check that out. It won't be surprising with some of the kids that they're going to have jump into the portal and stuff. And, they had lost the tight end, Sam West, who I thought was a pretty good ball player. It just comes down to these kids want to be on the field, and they just don't want to play in a role and bide their time, and they get discouraged, or they feel like they need to be playing. So it's easy to jump in the portal because there's no rules. You can just jump in at any time with that. The next thing here, and I'll show you a little bit of Henry Olinger. That's the kid out of Grandview, 4-star recruit. Good player. I liked his film. I think he's got a lot of raw talent. And I think in that regard, he's going to be a great kid that can come in and be that replacement in time for Aiden Fisher type, because they're going to lose Aiden Fisher after this year. So this kid, I think, has the ability to be a really good player. As you see him here at the Mike linebacker, does a good job here. Not bad. He's carrying number 3. He settles to his zone, but you can see his eyes back watching the quarterback. And all of a sudden he sees the quarterback is in trouble. He gets up the field, and I call it pulled the chain, and he ends up getting a sack in space. So that was a pretty good player. Here's one that I liked. He's in the gap, playing up front, and he's going to take on the offensive lineman. Does a good job of shedding him here, kind of throwing, as you can see. And then he's in the position to make a tackle in the gap, which I think is really good for a young linebacker. And remember, this is his junior tape, so his tape's only going to get better in that regard. Again, here's another play where he takes on the offensive lineman. He keeps his leverage on the ball, and he's able to see and react and make a play there in space. Although it was 5 yards, he prevents a long one. Here's a really good play. Now 44 does a heck of a job of turning this back into him, and he comes over the top. He gets stacked by the lineman. He works his way over the top of that double team, and 44 turns it right back because he knows the linebacker's there, and he is, and they make a great play together, and it's fun. This was one of those fun ones too. This is physicality right here. Whack. I'm going to go make the play. So you can kind of see this kid. This is another one, man. This one to me is what sold me on him overall. This is a football player. This is what you like to have at Mike linebacker when he gets in and reads the gap and he just fills it and whack right there. Boom. That sold me on his ability as a linebacker. Junior year, only going to get better with his senior season, and we just got to get him to December and get those papers signed, because he's going to be a kid that the other teams are definitely going to come back and try, to flip him, and Indiana's going to have to, hold on to him. It's but those two kids again, good pickups for Indiana out of the portal, and then a true freshman getting picked up as well. And then I'll have more on the kid that committed tonight as well. Real quick here before we do a little bit of discussion here before we get to Zach Osterman and I's conversation tonight. Spring game. I know it's a week later. We're doing a recap of the spring game, but you know, it was a little short. It was shorter than it was a year ago. They got the equivalent of 2 quarters of football played, so about 30 minutes. And I was impressed with Fernando and where he's at in his development in the offense. I do think he has a very good arm. I do think he has the ability to throw it deep and throw it with touch. And I also think he has the ability to make the tough throws if needed, sitting in the pocket. One thing that he gives Coach Shanahan this year is the ability to move the pocket with bootleg, type of plays, and then sprint outs. And I only think that's going to help Indiana's offense because those are things that help the offensive line. When the offensive linemen are having to just do straight drop back passing, which they got into a lot last year because of Rourke's knee injury, they get, those D linemen fire off and, pin their ears back. So I really like that. I do like the running back room. I think it's going to be as good as the running back room was this year. Black, Hemby, Beebe, those 3 guys I think are very, very good. And Hemby's a Big Ten player. You know what he did for Maryland. Beebe coming from Alabama, Birmingham. And then Black's a guy that's been in Cincinnati's program for a while, biding his time, and he's going to get a chance, and I think he'll rock and roll. I do think the wide receiver room will be just as good. They knew they're going to have to find that extra guy that they lost with Tyler Morris's injury, but I do think they'll maybe find somebody in the portal that can help them out there. I like what they've got. I like some of the young guys that are out there as well. You got Bond and some other guys that I think are very good players. I do think the tight end position is going to be the biggest spot on the offense that we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Zach Horton did so much from blocking to being a wide receiver on the perimeter blocking, and we'll have to see how the tight ends do with that, whether or not they're utilized the same way as Horton was, or will they have to go to more 3 receiver sets and 4 receiver sets to get a true wideout in the game with all that. So offensively and then up front, I think they'll be fine. With Coogan there anchoring that first unit. And I do think they've got pretty good solid depth, more so than they've ever had. They came out healthy. There was a couple guys bumped up that didn't play, like Khalil Benson didn't play. So I'm not worried about the offensive line. So I do look for the offense to be pretty solid heading into fall. And I like where Fernando's at in his development. I thought Alberto did well as well, because I think he's coming up in the system. The Grant Wilson kid, again, he's a big kid, played ball, 6'5". He was injured last year. He got injured at about the second week of the season, so he lost a ton of reps. But he's very capable. So in all, that's good. And then, man, the defense. I mean, again, I know we lose Walker and but we got Aiden Fisher back. The secondary, I think, is going to be lights out. I really do. I think they've got legit talent, with D'Angelo and some of the guys they brought in via the portal. And then adding these late pieces here up front, I think is going to be a huge, positive for them. It's one of those things that as we go along, we'll get, more guys in the portal because we're getting to that end of the year and they're having their conversations. And remember what I told you about spring ball and how all that is intertwined into this evaluation period, because they have to be able to tell a kid yay or nay, or where they see them in the equation. We'll have to see what all happens and on who they are. And this is where being a part of the On3 group, you can get on On3. They'll have latest information from commitments to those guys that are jumping in the portal and guys that maybe are in the portal that may be a possibility for Indiana to pick up via the portal. So don't forget, get that subscription. 50% off for the first month, 50% off for the first year. Can't beat it with all the information that guys are bringing to the table with Browning and Alec, and then of course the national guys. You got Steve Wilfong, who's the Indiana-based guy that is their national recruiting guy, and there's just a wealth of knowledge there at On3, and then of course the Hoosier.com with everything. Let's see here. Will we be a deep ball? We got some guys that can go get it. You got EJ Williams, of course. He brings an opportunity to the table, stay healthy, and he's a legit guy that can get down the field. You got Surratt as well. Don't forget him out there on the outside, and this Becker kid that's been in the program for 2 years now. And then I think up here, Bond has got a speed. I broke down his tape last year. He's got a lot of speed. And if they can get him pointed in the right direction and he can do the things they need him to do, I think, he's one of those guys could step in and help the offense out and be a part of it. And then Jason, let's see. I wanted to see Blackmore check down passes as long as the tight ends are on the field with. That's the one thing about the offense, too, is that they're going to have backs that can catch the ball out of the backfield, Hemby as well as Beebe. Both those guys are very capable, and I doubt, I think Kellen Black is going to be that as well. So it's good. It was all good with the spring game. They came out healthy. That's the most important thing. I guess I should add. Oh, okay. Yeah. You mean as far as guys that, to go deep? Yeah. I think if you asked Fernando if he likes what he sees on the outside, I think he'd tell you yes, because he's gotten a chance to work with him now for the spring and such. And it's one of those things where he's been able to do a lot of that this spring. And I think, he had a really good spring practice. And that's the key component there with everything. Up next here, we're going to have Zach Osterman from the Indianapolis Star and talk to him about things from A to Z in some of that respect of where he sees Indiana today from even a year ago to today. And then on top of that, I had a really good conversation later that I will get out later, probably next week. We talked about where we're at with this NCAA house settlement stuff and the new kind of holding on. This roster size limits are being challenged and some of that. And he had some good takes on that, but I got that saved for another day, that hopefully will be all said and done with this stupid deal with the NCAA house settlement, so that they can put a bow on it and get ready to go, because there's a lot of things riding on that, and hopefully they can get it played. But I'm going to get with Zach here, and we'll be right back at it right here in a moment.
Hello, Hoosier Nation. Go to thehoosier.com and take advantage of the 50% off for the first month. Then 50% off on the first year of your subscription. You will get wall-to-wall coverage of the Indiana Hoosiers from Alec Lasley, Zach Browning, and the Coach Shannon Griffith on the Hoosier Football Tailgate. All on the Hoosier. Come.
Welcome back to the Hoosier Football Tailgate right here on thehoosier.com, powered by On3 Sports as well. Joining me now from the Indianapolis Star, the one and only Mr. Zach Osterman. Zach, how you doing today, buddy?
Hey, how we doing?
Well, I know you're getting ready to do the 500 here coming up this weekend.
Yeah.
I'm sure things are going well in that avenue for you outside of your writing responsibilities.
It's selfishly, because there was a time when I weighed a lot less and I had more time to work out and train. One of my favorite weeks of the year, because I rode Little Five a lot of years ago, and I don't think I have anything up here I can flash in front of the screen that proves that. It's all down in the basement. Now I help coach a team. It's a lot like the Indianapolis 500. There's a prestige to who wins, but it's what's a lot more fun is the celebration. And for those of us who rode, so many of us come back, and obviously, I live in Bloomington, so it's easy for me. But to see so many old friends and kind of be able to relive memories, it's hard to believe this will be, I think, my 20th race. As a rider or coach with a couple in there as just a plain old spectator. So it's always one of the best weekends of the year for me.
Well, like anything else, it's a storied tradition there at Indiana and a spectacle to be seen. And if you haven't been able to go, I encourage you to go see one of the most interesting, fascinating days of guys riding around a track and giving it their all. It surely is a great spectacle to see. And I'm sure every IU grad out there understands that. But I went once when I was a underclassman. My wife was at IU at the time, and I actually got to see it all from that perspective. Pretty crowded day there at the track, but hey, it was nice and sunny and hot, that's for sure, so that made it better. Let's talk a little bit about the Indiana Hoosiers as just finished spring practice, gearing up now for the off season here once the graduation is all said and done, and year two under Coach Signetti. Let's kind of look back and what, I guess, if anything, what was your biggest surprise takeaway from Coach Signetti's first year in Bloomington and how it set up coming into a second year with the spring practice being that first true evaluation?
Well, I don't think, if you want to talk about the biggest surprise of the first year, I think the biggest surprise is the obvious one, right? I think we all, I came out of last year's spring game and last year's spring season in general thinking, I can see how this works, and I can see, why this guy's been successful. And, I was the one who I think, semi-famously, at least around here, picked Indiana to win 9 games last year. And even I wound up, looking like I'd vastly underestimated that team, not just based on results, but performances as well. Mm-hmm. And I think what's been pronounced, over these last few months, and Signetti said this, he's verbalized it a few times, and I think even more it's been even more apparent through his sort of his actions, is this real sense of wanting to put 2024 in the rearview mirror as sort of intentionally as possible. And, listen, that's probably easier than it used to be with the way the portal works. Obviously, I don't think Indiana wants to be quite as portal heavy as it's been the last couple cycles. Signetti's talked about as time goes on, evening out classes a little bit more, having a bit more of a mix of players that were developed internally and then players added via the portal. But you're always going to have more turnover than what used to be normal just in the portal era. And so it's always probably going to be a little bit easier to move on from year to year. And every year, a little bit like the NFL is going to feel kind of, a little bit unto itself. Not quite the same, because you can't obviously have a quarterback around for 10 years, but,
right.
But there is a little bit more of that sort of idea of like you have your core players and every year is about sort of, either drafting well or, free agenting well to sort of accentuate that core and strengthen that group, the sort of the framework around that group. And I think college is going to feel a little bit more like that now. So it's going to be a little bit easier to turn that page just year to year. But it has been really intentional from Indiana to say last year was great, but last year is over. And, everything that we're doing now is about this season right here in front of us. It's about 2025. I think what Cignetti has said multiple times is we're on to 2025. There has just been a pronounced sense of, we are done with that, and now we're moving to this. And it's going to be fascinating because I think this team is a little bit of a blend of old and new. I think, there are some sort of tried and tested, pieces on this team that if they stay healthy, you feel like you're going to be able to count on. But there's still a lot of guys that, at least at Indiana, are not yet sort of fully proven that are going to have to kind of step forward if this coming season is anything as successful as last season was.
Yeah, and you talked a little bit there about the portal and the importance that I guess you could say every team in the Power Five of college football now has a kind of firm grasp of how to utilize it to their best advantages and such. And hey, let's face it, it's created a competitive balance in some respects, like in the Big Ten and some other conferences as well. Right now, they're not going to have as many kids. They picked up, I think, 22 as of this moment, the biggest one coming this past week with the Kellen Wyatt kid out of Maryland, which I think was a big pickup as well. And then getting Henry Olinger, the 4-star linebacker out of Grandview, was a huge pickup for them. So it seems as if that, along with the mentality of Indiana football, changing as well in the outer reaches of Bloomington as it pertains to the recruiting grounds in favor of them. What is there, in your mind, do you think there's any other position that, we think Cignetti probably still isn't going to work on with the portal?
I mean, I think that the obvious one, especially you mentioned Wyatt, there's also, I think, Stephen Daly, the Kent State
Daly
transfer.
From Kent State. Yeah.
So you feel like, because it did feel like Indiana, especially when Marcus Burris left, maybe needed a little bit more balance at the edge. Even if you like a young player like a Landino or a Daniel Ndukwe, you felt like you probably still needed a little bit more sort of veteran balance there with Kamara on the other side of the line. I think the other really obvious one is wide receiver. And Cignetti hasn't even really kind of minced words in saying with Tyler Morris out for the year with the knee injury, Indiana's going to need some help there. Now you can, it seems like Charlie Becker is a player that the staff really likes, even going back to last season. It sounded like LeBron Bond, who was an early enrollee freshman, had a pretty good camp. It's, I don't want to minimize receiver as a position, because I think all positions in modern football, especially modern offense, are just very difficult. But you can take like a freshman and you can say, hey, this year only, you're just going to do this one thing within the position. And all we need you to do are get these specific reads and checks down. And we won't ask you to do too much, maybe, blocking, or we won't, we'll work on the physical side of your game later or whatever. But right here, right now, we just need you to be able to step in and just give us, some very specific kinds of snaps. And I think receiver is a position where, with the right player, you can get that out of a true freshman at a level that it might be a little bit harder for an offensive lineman, for example, just because things move a little bit faster, because the physical side of it is a little bit different. But especially with this offense, I think that's a lot to ask, because I think that the flip side to what I just said is, in this offense, your offensive coordinator is your wide receivers coach. We saw last year, so much of this offense is built around both receiver playmaking and then also the ability for readers to read and sort of read and deliver blocks. I mean, it sounds simplistic, but how important was Indiana's perimeter and downfield blocking last season to the health of this offense? It was enormous. You're putting a lot on the plate of a true freshman. I find it hard to believe that this staff is not going to, especially because, again, Kurt Cignetti has said this out loud, is going to have seen anything in the spring game that said, actually, we were wrong. We've got what we need, even with the injury. Because even, I would even point out a player like E.J. Williams, who's, right now maybe Indiana's top sort of second string boundary receiver. He's had some injury issues as well. All it takes is one more injury, essentially, and you really start to get in trouble. And as you know, as a coach, often the reason why injury crises tend to sort of center on specific positions is because what happens is one guy gets hurt and you try to spread everybody a little bit thinner. And then somebody else plays a little too much, wears down a little bit too much, suffers an injury because of that wear and tear. Then suddenly you spread everybody a little bit thinner than that. And before you know it, you have 3 or 4 injuries at a given position that are all the result of the first injury and not managing the impact of that. The portal allows you that opportunity to say, okay, thought we could, really had Tyler Morris penciled in for a lot of snaps this year. That's not going to happen. Let's go see if we can find somebody else. Indiana does have some room under the scholarship limit, and so I would be surprised if Indiana doesn't add at least some help at receiver. I know they were also, kind of kicking around a couple tight end names, but I think that might have been more specific to the player rather than saying we need another tight end. I think that might have been a little bit more of we really like this player, and if we can get them, we'll fit them in and we'll just make it work. But we did see Sam West go out the door in the portal at the end of spring, so maybe there isn't a need for one more tight end. Receiver is, though, the one that I would highlight more than any other, that I would just sort of say, I think because of what you've lost there to attrition last winter and then to injury through the spring, I think Indiana's got to find a way to add at least one quality player there.
Talking with Zach Osterman from the Indianapolis Star, I think you're right. I think with losing Tyler Morris like they did, I think that was a pretty big blow in that regard. And you talked about the perimeter blocking, the one big piece of the puzzle that Indiana will miss, regardless of who is in that position, is losing Horton at the tight end, because he was such a valuable player on the perimeter blocking that maybe never got recognized in some respects. But again, that will be an interesting how that all plays out with the States and the other tight end. I can't think of his name right now.
Riley Nowakowski. So
yeah, Nowakowski.
And then Jim Bomba's back as well. So you've got experience there. But to your point, do you have one guy that can do all of it? Because you don't want to wind up in a situation where opponents know anytime Holden Stays is on the field, you're passing, and anytime Riley Nowakowski's on the field, the tight end's blocking. You don't want to become predictable that way.
Correct. And that's again, I do think we'll see more 3 receiver sets and potentially 4 receiver sets, as opposed to just the tight end and 2 other additional receivers in the game like they did with Horton last year, until they develop that tight end spot. With that being said and everything. Well, the other thing is the crazy thing that's going on right now. We got the NCAA suit that's waiting for that final approval. They're hung up now on roster size, with the judge really taking hold of these these athletes that have come in and filed in, different lawsuits and wanting to keep the roster limits the same. And so now they're looking at grandfathering in some type of scenario. In football, it was 125. You could have 125 in your program, 85 on scholarship. The new roster rules would be 105, and you would essentially lose 20 bodies, which no college coach was very happy about anyway, in that regard. And the walk-on status is basically out the window. Well, now it's kind of you may pick up 20 bodies again before we go in. With all the chaos that's going around with that and some of the implementation that they're trying to get done, in some respects, don't you feel like they've put the cart before the horse in some of the things that they're trying to do, especially for the fall sports that are at a disadvantage when you have something that's carried on this long in the legal process, that they're still waiting on something that should have been figured out minutes ago?
Yeah, so basically, and I wrote something about this week related to basketball, but it is related to everything. I've gotten a lot of confusion from people who said, what's the difference between a scholarship limit and a roster cap? So the scholarship limits have not changed, at least in terms of like what are the standard numbers going forward, even presuming the House settlement gets approved. So like you mentioned, 85 scholarships for football, 13 for men's and women's basketball, full counter sports get, those full complements. Then you have equivalency sports. So baseball, for example, has been on 11.7 scholarships for years. You get the equivalent money of 11.7 scholarships to spread among a roster of 35 players, however you choose to. Most guys, if they're getting any money, it's maybe 10% of a scholarship or 20% of a scholarship. And those kinds of negotiations go on between players and coaches all the time. What the roster caps are is, as part of the House settlement, there was an agreement that schools would be allowed to offer more scholarships over the current scholarship limits that we just talked about, 85 for football, for example. What the NCAA wanted to avoid was rich schools, the moneyed schools, saying, fine, we'll add 50 more scholarships. And then, because you used to see this like in the old days of the SEC, like the reason Bobby Dodd took Georgia Tech out of the SEC was because Alabama used to sign, Bear Bryant would sign like 45 kids. And then he would cut half of them at the end of fall camp, but he would sign them so that they then couldn't transfer to another SEC institution. And so his whole point was, I'm not going to keep half these players, but I'm going to make sure that they don't wind up in my conference. And Bobby Dodd went, and this was obviously the 50s or whatever, the 60s. Bobby Dodd went to the SEC and said, we got to stop this. The SEC wouldn't stand up to Bear Bryant. And so Georgia Tech left the SEC. The roster cap is not a scholarship limit. It says, so for football, for example, as you mentioned, it says you can only have 105 players on a football team. You can have up to 85 scholarships, and then you can add more if you'd like to, but you can only add up to 105. That your hard roster cap, you cannot have more than 105 players on your roster at any given time, no matter what the distribution is between scholarship and non-scholarship, because what the NCAA was trying to prevent was the idea that schools could start hoarding more talent. And then if guys can't, if guys get signed out of high school and stashed, maybe they never play, maybe they never get the opportunity. It also creates an uneven playing field because suddenly, let's say Georgia again, or Alabama can go out there and say, we'll give you all this money, come here, knowing that they don't really have a plan for the player, but now that player doesn't, another school doesn't get that player. The problem with that is the obvious one, which is what you said, and what Claudia Wilkin, who's the judge in the House case, has said, is you're cutting if you implement these hard caps right away, you're cutting all these players loose. All these walk-ons, you're just telling them tomorrow, we don't have room for you anymore, especially in football. But that's true in some other sports too. It'll be true in men's and women's basketball in all likelihood. It'll be true in some other sports as well. What everyone, I think I don't mean to sound flippant or glib, but what everyone with a brain, I think, has argued is, why don't we grandfather these in? Why don't we give like a 3-year cycling down from the current numbers? Because to your point, you can have 125 in camp. Now you can have as many as you want during the season, but like this, with Nebraska and Kansas State famously have enormous walk-on programs historically. But you grandfather that number in and you sort of slowly lower it down. So basically what schools can do is just let kids graduate and not replace them. The NCAA and the power conferences have dug in on this. I don't really understand why. I don't think I'm the only one who doesn't understand why. I'm sure there are reasons. That doesn't mean that they're good enough to risk blowing up the whole thing over. Because if this goes to trial, the whole reason why the NCAA wants to settle the House case is because it's pretty confident that if the case goes to trial, the NCAA is going to get bankrupted and it's going to cease to exist.
Yeah. Right.
So,
well, like you said, the biggest thing is, I'll tell you why they're fighting it, because that's 20 extra theoretical dollars that they would have to come, out of that 20.5 million that's coming back to them theoretically.
But you don't have to do that. You don't have to add the extra scholarship. And Kurt Signetti said this, and I did not realize this until he said it in the winter. You can't add those scholarships a la carte. So you can't just say, I want 2 more scholarships for football. If you add any scholarships over, and this is where I think people get confused. If you add any scholarships over the current limit, you have to commit the full $2.5 million out of your $20.5 million to extra scholarships. So, and some schools will do it. Like a lot of people expect SEC schools to add a bunch of
Right.
money to baseball and like volleyball and swimming, because those are sports the SEC is traditionally really good at anyway. I don't think Indiana will do that. I think Indiana will say we just want to share the whole 20.5 as just pure revenue straight back to the athletes. It's a choice. But it also gives you options like splitting scholarships. I didn't know that Kursignetti said that you can now, even in full counter sports where you weren't allowed to
Weren't
say,
allowed to, right?
yeah,
Football was
like
the biggest one.
yeah. I mean, like what would make sense to me, for example, with basketball would be 12 full scholar, because the basketball roster cap is 15, the scholarship limit is 13. Say 12 full scholarship players, and then take a 13th scholarship, split it 3 ways, and go get 3, pretty high quality walk-ons, players that might have gone somewhere else, but now that you'll pay, especially maybe in-state, now that you'll pay a third of their tuition, they'll come to you. So you don't have to give that extra money. Again, it's I'm sure they have reasons, but you just sort of feel like we are the finish line is in sight for this thing that has been so difficult for everyone to manage, and it's required so many different people to make sacrifices and concessions, and you just think, is this the hill that the House settlement really wants to die on?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think there'll be a compromise somehow, some way. Maybe not 125. It may be 110 or 115, however you want to look at it. But it is a dynamic that is throwing a big wrench into the equation of things that are going on right now. One last thing before I get you out of here. Fernando Mendoza, kind of your takes on his development to this point. I thought in the spring game, he was able to do a lot of the things that you would expect him to do, and you can see some things that Indiana maybe did not do with Curtis Rourke for obvious reasons, that Mendoza will give them that dynamic, such as changing the launch point with bootlegs and sprint out type of passes. But how have you seen his development through all this process to where we're at the end of the spring?
It's funny. I would not normally say this, and that's why I hope I would not normally place a lot of weight on this, and so the fact that I am, I hope says something. The first time I really, and obviously, listen, I mean, Mendoza came with some real bona fides, right? Like about over 4,000 career yards passing in the ACC, 3,000 last year, had a really good season last season, despite the fact that he was sacked 41 times, and he'd be the first to tell you some of those are on the quarterback, but there's no way all 41 are on a quarterback that threw for 3,000 yards. And I thought it was impressive too. I think he cut his passes per interception rate by about 30 attempts, which is a remarkable number, in terms of his efficiency and his accuracy, his decision making. I would not normally place a lot of weight on pro day film, but I was watching back after Indiana's pro day through some of because he threw for Indiana's receivers in some of those situations at pro day, and some of the balls that he was throwing were just sort of I mean, they were, and you and I both seen a lot of quarterbacks. I try not to be impressed easily. There were moments when I just saw, wow, that's like the touch, the placement, the timing, and I understand the setting there. That's in shorts. That's not against a live defense, all that kind of stuff. But it's not like you have to question what he looks like against a live defense. He's played 2 years of Power 4 football, including last year being pretty prolific, at a fairly high level in a program that's not easy to win. Justin Wilcox has done an outstanding job at Cal. That is a tough place to win, and it's probably only gotten tougher since the Pac-12 dissolved. So, to do what he's done, and you already kind of get a sense for this is probably a really good quarterback. This is a quarterback that Miami wanted. This is a quarterback that Georgia wanted. And then you see just like how natural he looks throwing the ball to NFL caliber prospects, even in a setting like that. That was kind of my first moment of this might be something a little different. Obviously, you're going to be very limited in a spring game. Quarterbacks can't get hit. You're not going to, I know it wasn't televised, but every coach is paranoid about anything that gets put on film anywhere at all. I mean, I remember last year on the defensive side, I watched Bryant Haynes blitz more than I ever expected him to. And I thought, wow, maybe they're going to blitz a lot this year. And then they were like one of the least blitz prone teams in the entire country. So I think there's times when coaches will quite literally do stuff in spring just to throw people off. But it has been very hard in the glimpses I've seen of him. And we beyond the spring game, which full disclosure, I was not at because I'd taken my wife to a concert for her birthday because, sometimes the boss is not the one up in the newsroom in Indianapolis.
That's right.
But in the glimpses we've been able to see, I mean, there has just been kind of an ease and a natural, sort of feel that you can just sense. Now, Curt Cignetti has said from the beginning, he said it's kind of similar to Curtis Rourke. First half of spring wasn't great. You're drinking through a fire hose. You're learning new formations, new calls and checks. A lot of stuff is really just new terminology and retraining your brain. That at Cal we called this one thing, but over here we call it something different. I think it's probably helped him that his little brother was already there. I think Mendoza said he basically picked up the playbook on Christmas Day when he committed. Or right around the time he committed, and just said I start now. But as good as Curtis Rourke was, you could still see the rough moments earlier in the calendar than what I've seen from Fernando Mendoza so far. Now, let's not get out over our skis.
Right.
Let's see it on Saturdays in the fall, because we can all find instances of springtime All-Americans that don't translate when the lights come on. But again, it's not like we don't know what Fernando Mendoza looks like at the Power 4 level already. And then it's not like we don't know what it looks like for a transfer quarterback in Curt Cignetti's system. His last 3 quarterbacks have all been all conference or better. Yeah. And they've all been transfers.
Right.
You got a Sun Belt player in the year in there. You got second team All Big Ten in there. Curtis Rourke, quite possibly an NFL draft pick this spring, or I guess this weekend.
Yeah.
So it's not like there's not already a body of evidence, both for the player and for the setup he is stepping into. And in the glimpses we've seen, as somebody who, Lord knows, you and I have both seen enough IU football to know not to get carried away too often. But in the glimpses we've seen, it is difficult for me to sit here and say with a straight face that I think Indiana fans should withhold optimism. I think there is a lot to like about Mendoza's game. I think there's a lot of ways in which it makes sense. I think, you bring up something there. I think it's important that the offense evolves a little bit. I think every team's got to get a little bit different, not even necessarily better, but just different in an offseason. Yeah. You can't do the same thing from one year to the next. And if you've got a quarterback that can do some of the same things, but suddenly can throw in some wrinkles and maybe there's some things Mendoza can't do as well as Curtis Rourke.
Right.
Maybe he doesn't throw as well under pressure. Maybe he doesn't use the intermediate routes as well. But as you said, maybe he's better on the run. Maybe he's better when you shift the pocket. Maybe suddenly there's more play action, more bootleg you've got to account for. That makes Indiana a different proposition offensively, and I think that can play into Indiana's hands as well.
Well, no question. I think you're spot on there with what your thoughts are with him, and as we head into the off season, it's just a matter of adding upon the things that they can get better at and get ready for fall camp, because it's going to be a tough Big Ten battle as we head into the season this year. And they got a grinder after the non-conference. They got Illinois at home, Iowa, and Oregon on the road. So going to find out real quick. Zach, I appreciate you being here with us tonight on the Hoosier Football Tailgate. Catch you again another time, but I really appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, as always.
Zach Osterman from the Indianapolis Star. We're going to be back right after this message.
Hello, Hoosier Nation. Go to thehoosier.com and take advantage of the 50% off for the first month. Then 50% off on the first year of your subscription. You will get wall-to-wall coverage of the Indiana Hoosiers from Alec Lasley, Zach Browning, and the Coach Shannon Griffith on the Hoosier Football Tailgate. all on the Hoosier. Come.
Welcome back. That was a great little conversation there with Zach Osterman from the Indianapolis Star. And Zach has a wealth of knowledge. He's a great writer and covers Indiana's football, but not just football, but basketball as well. And get a chance, you want to follow him because he'll keep you up to date on a lot of things throughout the year, both football and basketball. But appreciate him coming on and sharing his knowledge of where he thought the Indiana Hoosiers were compared to a little bit of last year and then Fernando Mendoza and all of that. It's been a whirlwind when you think of some of this stuff. When Coach Cignetti's been here just a year, he's flipped the program. There is as much enthusiasm in Bloomington for football and basketball that we probably have never seen. And in maybe the history of Indiana athletics, there is just a very groundswelling of enthusiasm, support, and all that. And it's ready to blow up again. And hopefully the Hoosiers can take off right where they left off last season and get off to a great start, because they do have a grinder after those 3 non-conference games. They got Illinois, which will be a very good football team with Altemeyer, their quarterback, coming back. He's a player. And then add to that, you go on the road to Iowa. That's never fun. And then all the way out to Oregon. So Hoosiers are going to have a 3-week period there where they're going to be in the grinder for a lot of that, those 3 weeks. So it's important to get off to a great start. And then, of course, find a way to win 1 or 2 of those games that you come up in the Big Ten category with Illinois, Iowa, and Oregon. Well, I appreciate you guys joining me here tonight you've got the NFL draft that is on right now. I've seen some guys sharing back and forth with that, and got some new things on the horizon. We'll let out of the bag at the appropriate time. Was going to do it tonight, but some things popped up that it was unable to release that information, but going to add some things that I think are going to be a big positive for the Hoosier football tailgate and the content that we try to bring you each and every week, because we want to be the best source for all things Indiana football. Don't forget to subscribe and follow on X and Instagram and so forth for all the other information. And don't forget the Hoosier.com to follow there for great content. And they've been pumping it out here lately because there's been a lot of it. So tomorrow I'll have an update with that new commit for the Indiana Hoosiers, a video breakdown of what I think he is doing. The other 2 are up. And if you want to go take a harder look at what I think of those 2 prospects, Henry Orlinger, the 4-star linebacker out of Grandview, and then, of course, Kellen Wyatt, the portal transfer defensive linebacker from Maryland. You can find all that on the Hoosier.com. Well, I appreciate you guys joining me here again tonight. Stay tuned till next week. We'll be right back here with you Thursday night, 7 to 30, with all your Indiana Hoosier football updates and interviews that you can have. But for now, I am the coach, Shannon Griffith. Good night, everybody. This has been the Hoosier Football Tailgate right here on the Hoosier.com.